Hi there. Have you ever heard of confirmation bias? It's an interesting psychological concept.
Yes, I've heard about it. It's when people favor information that supports their beliefs, right?
Exactly. It's a tendency to seek out and accept information that confirms what we already think.
Why do you think people do that? Is it just a cognitive thing?
Well, it's not just cognitive. Emotions play a big role too. When we hear something that aligns with our views, it feels good.
So, it's like we're wired to avoid information that challenges us.
Yes, our brains like to take shortcuts. When we encounter challenging info, it triggers discomfort.
Ah, so that's why people sometimes ignore facts that don't fit their beliefs.
Precisely. It's a defense mechanism to protect our ego and reduce cognitive dissonance.
Can you give an example of confirmation bias in everyday life?
Sure. Let's say someone strongly believes in a particular diet. They'll seek out info that supports it, ignoring contrary studies.
That's interesting. So, how can we overcome confirmation bias?
One way is to actively seek out opposing viewpoints and question our own beliefs.
But isn't that uncomfortable?
It can be, but it's essential for personal growth and making informed decisions.
So, it's like training our minds to be more open.
Exactly. Being aware of our biases and consciously challenging them can help.
What about emotional aspects? How do they relate to confirmation bias?
Emotions like fear and anger can intensify confirmation bias. They make us cling to familiar beliefs.
That makes sense. Emotions can cloud our judgment.
Absolutely. It's essential to recognize when emotions are influencing our thinking.
Can you share any tips to minimize the impact of confirmation bias in our lives?
Well, first, be open to feedback and criticism. It can be hard, but it's necessary for personal growth.
What else can we do?
Surround yourself with diverse perspectives. Engage in respectful discussions with people who have different views.
So, diversity of thought can help combat confirmation bias?
Yes, it exposes us to alternative viewpoints and challenges our biases.
It sounds like a continuous process of self-awareness and learning.
Exactly. It's an ongoing journey, but it's worth it for a more balanced perspective.
Have you ever thought about confirmation bias in politics?
It's when people only listen to news that confirms their political views, right?
Exactly. It deepens political divides.
So, it's like living in a bubble.
Yes, an echo chamber. People hear what they want to hear.
But why does this happen in politics?
It's partly our brain's way of reducing discomfort. We prefer confirming info.
So, how does this affect public discourse?
It polarizes discussions. People become less willing to consider other viewpoints.
That sounds problematic. How can we combat this?
One way is media literacy. Teaching people to critically evaluate news sources.
And not just accept information blindly.
Right. Encourage diverse sources and perspectives.
But isn't it natural to trust what aligns with our beliefs?
It is, but it's crucial to balance it with critical thinking.
So, it's about being open to different viewpoints.
Exactly. Engaging in civil debates can also help.
But debates can get so heated. How can we keep it civil?
Focus on facts and avoid personal attacks. Respectful disagreement is healthy.
What about social media? It plays a big role, right?
Yes, social media algorithms show us content we're likely to agree with.
So, it reinforces our existing beliefs.
Exactly. It's designed that way to keep us engaged.
But that can be harmful in politics.
It can lead to more extreme views and less compromise.
Are there any consequences for policymaking?
Absolutely. Polarization makes it harder to pass effective policies.
So, it affects governance too.
Yes, it can lead to gridlock and hinder progress.
That's concerning. Can individuals make a difference?
Yes, by being aware of their bias and seeking diverse information.
What about politicians? Can they help?
Politicians can promote civil discourse and reach across the aisle.
So, it's not just a personal responsibility.
Right. It's a collective effort to bridge political divides.
What can schools do to address this issue?
Teach critical thinking skills and media literacy from a young age.
So, it starts with education.
Yes, that's a fundamental step.
Is there hope for reducing confirmation bias in politics?
There's always hope. It starts with awareness and a commitment to change.
It's a complex issue, but change is possible.
Indeed, it's worth striving for a more open and informed society.
Let's hope for a future with healthier political discourse.
Agreed. It's a goal worth working towards.
Have you ever tried to mitigate confirmation bias in your thinking?
Yes, it's challenging. Confirmation bias can affect decision-making, right?
Absolutely. It's our tendency to favor information that confirms our beliefs.
So, how can we counteract it?
One way is to actively seek diverse perspectives and information sources.
That means not just sticking to what we're comfortable with?
Right? Expanding our horizons can help us make more informed decisions.
What about engaging with opposing viewpoints?
It's essential. Engaging in civil discussions with people who hold different views can broaden our understanding.
But sometimes, it can be uncomfortable, right?
Yes, it can, but it's a growth opportunity. It helps us see the bigger picture.
What role does fact-checking play in mitigating confirmation bias?
Fact-checking is crucial. It ensures we base our decisions on accurate information.
So, we shouldn't just believe what we read or hear?
Correct. Verify information before accepting it as truth.
Are there any practical tips to break the confirmation bias cycle?
Firstly, be aware of your biases. Recognizing them is the first step.
And then,
Actively seek out opposing viewpoints. Challenge your own beliefs.
what about emotions? They can influence our bias, right?
Yes, emotions play a significant role. Be mindful of emotional reactions and try to separate them from facts.
So, it's about being more rational.
Exactly. Emotions can cloud our judgment.
Can you give an example of confirmation bias in everyday life?
Sure, let's say someone believes a certain diet is the best. They'll only look for information supporting that diet.
And ignore information about other diets?
Right? That's confirmation bias in action.
How can we apply these strategies to everyday decisions?
Start by questioning your assumptions. Ask yourself why you believe what you do.
And then,
Seek out information that challenges your beliefs. Engage in discussions with people who disagree.
it sounds like a continuous process.
It is, but it leads to better informed decisions and critical thinking.
What about social media? It can be a breeding ground for bias.
True. Social media algorithms often show us content we agree with. Be mindful of this.
So, should we limit our time on social media?
It's not about limiting but being aware of the echo chamber effect.
What's the echo chamber effect?
It's when you only hear and see what aligns with your beliefs, reinforcing your bias.
So, it's like living in a bubble.
Yes, and it's not healthy for critical thinking.
How can we avoid the echo chamber on social media?
Follow a diverse range of accounts. Don't just follow those who share your views.
What if someone feels overwhelmed by all this information?
Take it step by step. Start by questioning one belief at a time.
And gradually expand your perspective.
Yes, it's a process that takes time and effort.
But it's worth it to make better decisions.
Absolutely. It leads to more well-rounded thinking and better choices.
Have you ever thought about confirmation bias and group dynamics?
Yes, it's interesting. It's when groups prefer confirming views and avoid dissent, right?
Exactly. It can lead to groupthink.
What's groupthink?
It's when a desire for consensus and harmony suppresses critical thinking in a group.
So, group members avoid disagreeing to keep things smooth?
Yes, they prioritize agreement over critical evaluation.
But isn't harmony in a group a good thing?
It can be, but not when it hinders rational decision-making.
How can we prevent groupthink and confirmation bias?
Encourage constructive dissent. Create an environment where diverse opinions are valued.
So, it's about welcoming disagreements?
Yes, it promotes a healthy exchange of ideas.
Are there any techniques to foster diverse perspectives?
Assign a devil's advocate role to challenge the group's consensus.
That sounds like a good strategy.
It helps uncover blind spots and biases.
Can you give an example of groupthink in action?
Sure. In a workplace, if everyone agrees with a flawed plan to avoid conflict, that's groupthink.
And the plan might fail because no one questioned it?
Precisely. Groupthink can lead to poor decisions.
Are there any real-world consequences of groupthink?
Yes, it can lead to catastrophic decisions in organizations or governments.
So, it's a significant issue.
It is, but awareness and open communication can combat it.
What about confirmation bias within groups?
Groups can amplify individual bias. Members reinforce each other's beliefs.
How can we mitigate this?
Encourage members to seek out diverse information and perspectives.
So, it's about breaking the echo chamber?
Right. It helps prevent tunnel vision.
What role do leaders play in combating groupthink and bias?
Leaders should encourage open dialogue and dissent. They set the tone for the group.
And they should lead by example?
Yes, by valuing different viewpoints and promoting critical thinking.
Can group dynamics affect decision-making in politics too?
Absolutely. Political groups can become echo chambers, reinforcing biases.
How can we address this in politics?
Encourage bipartisan discussions and fact-based decision-making.
It's not just about winning an argument.
Right, it's about finding the best solutions.
Are there any historical examples of groupthink causing problems?
The Bay of Pigs invasion is a classic example. Groupthink led to a flawed plan.
And the consequences were significant.
Yes, it's a cautionary tale.
So, it's essential to be aware of confirmation bias and groupthink in all aspects of life?
Absolutely. It affects decision-making in various contexts.
Let's work towards more open and critical group dynamics.
Have you ever thought about confirmation bias in online information consumption?
Absolutely. The internet has changed how we get information. Confirmation bias is a concern.
It's when we seek information that confirms our beliefs, right?
Yes, and online, it's easier than ever to find like-minded voices.
Social media plays a big role, with personalized feeds.
Those algorithms show us what we want to see, reinforcing our views.
So, it creates filter bubbles where we're exposed to limited perspectives?
Exactly. It narrows our world, which is not healthy for critical thinking.
Can we break free from these filter bubbles?
Yes, it's important. We can start by diversifying our online sources.
But isn't it more comfortable to stay within our bubble?
It is, but it hinders our ability to understand different viewpoints.
So, it's about actively seeking diverse opinions?
Yes, challenge your own beliefs by exploring different perspectives.
What about fact-checking online information?
That's crucial. Verify before accepting something as true.
But sometimes, false information spreads quickly.
True, but critical thinking helps filter out the noise.
Can you give an example of confirmation bias online?
Sure, imagine someone with strong political views. They'll follow and engage with like-minded individuals online.
So, they'll see posts and news that reinforce their beliefs?
Yes, and it can create a skewed perception of reality.
What role do social media companies play in this?
They design algorithms to keep us engaged. They prioritize content we're likely to agree with.
Which perpetuates confirmation bias.
Right, it's a business model.
How does this affect public discourse and unity?
It deepens divisions. People become less willing to compromise.
So, it's not just an individual issue?
No, it impacts society as a whole.
Are there any strategies to combat confirmation bias online?
Education is key. Teach digital literacy and critical thinking skills.
What about regulating social media?
It's a complex issue. Balancing free speech with responsible content is challenging.
It's a delicate balance.
Yes, but awareness and informed choices can help.
Are there any tools to identify biased sources?
Fact-checking websites and media literacy resources can be helpful.
What can individuals do to be more responsible online consumers?
Be mindful of your online habits. Consciously seek diverse sources and question information.
So, it's about being an active, critical thinker?
Absolutely. It's the best defense against confirmation bias.
What about discussing these issues with friends and family?
It can be a productive conversation. Encourage them to be aware too.
So, it's not just about changing our own habits?
Right, it's about promoting a culture of critical thinking.
Have you ever thought about how confirmation bias affects decision-making?
Yes, it's fascinating. It's when we favor information that confirms our beliefs, right?
Exactly. It impacts various aspects of life.
Can you give an example in business?
Certainly. Imagine a company believes their product is perfect. They only listen to positive feedback, ignoring any negative comments.
So, they miss opportunities for improvement?
Yes, and it can lead to product failures.
How about in finance?
Investors may only seek information that supports their bullish views on a stock, ignoring warning signs.
Which can lead to financial losses.
Precisely. Confirmation bias can cloud judgment.
And in personal relationships.
Think of a person who believes their partner is always right. They may overlook red flags in the relationship.
So, it can harm personal happiness too?
Yes, it affects decision-making in all areas.
How can we combat confirmation bias?
Start by being aware of it. Question your beliefs and actively seek opposing viewpoints.
Is it challenging to question our own beliefs?
It can be, but it's essential for making informed decisions.
Can you share a strategy to reduce confirmation bias in business?
Encourage a culture of open feedback. Welcome dissenting opinions and reward critical thinking.
And in finance?
Diversify your sources of information. Don't rely solely on sources that confirm your views.
So, it's about balance.
Yes, balancing critical thinking.
What about personal relationships?
Foster open communication. Listen to your partner's perspective and address concerns.
So, it's about empathy and understanding?
Exactly. It strengthens relationships.
Are there any famous examples of confirmation bias causing major problems?
The Challenger space shuttle disaster is a tragic example. Engineers dismissed warnings due to their bias toward a successful launch.
And it led to a catastrophe.
Yes, it had devastating consequences.
So, confirmation bias can be a matter of life and death?
Unfortunately, yes. It's vital to recognize and address it.
Are there any tools or techniques to help us make more informed decisions?
Decision-making frameworks like SWOT analysis or consulting with trusted advisors can provide diverse perspectives.
And reduce the impact of bias?
Exactly. They help you see the bigger picture.
How about everyday decisions?
Take a step back, consider alternatives, and seek advice when possible.
So, it's about being deliberate in our choices.
Yes, being mindful of our biases.
Have you ever considered confirmation bias in education?
Yes, it's crucial. Students often stick to their beliefs and resist new ideas, right?
Exactly. How can educators address this?
They can encourage critical thinking and open-mindedness.
Can you share a teaching strategy for that?
Sure, debates. They require students to consider opposing views.
So, it challenges their beliefs.
Yes, and it promotes critical analysis.
What about encouraging questions in the classroom?
That's important too. Encourage students to ask questions and explore different perspectives.
How can educators create an open learning environment?
By fostering a safe space where students feel comfortable expressing diverse opinions.
So, it's about respect and tolerance?
Yes, and valuing different viewpoints.
Can you share an example of confirmation bias in education?
Sure. Imagine a student who believes they're good at math. They may only seek out math problems that confirm their skills.
And avoid challenging problems?
Right. It limits their growth.
How can educators address this issue?
They can assign a variety of math problems, including challenging ones.
So, it encourages students to step out of their comfort zone.
Yes, it's about pushing boundaries.
How about teaching critical media literacy?
That's crucial. Help students discern reliable sources from biased ones.
So, it's about navigating the vast sea of information?
Yes, and being informed consumers of information.
Are there any resources for educators to teach critical thinking?
Yes, there are textbooks and online courses dedicated to teaching critical thinking skills.
So, it's a skill that can be learned?
Absolutely. It's essential for lifelong learning.
Can you share a real-world example of confirmation bias in education?
Think of a history student who believes a certain historical event happened for a specific reason. They may only seek sources confirming their view.
And ignore differing historical perspectives?
Right. It limits their understanding of history.
How can educators encourage students to explore different historical interpretations?
By presenting multiple viewpoints and encouraging research.
So, it's about promoting a well-rounded education?
Yes, and helping students think critically.
What about online courses? Can they address confirmation bias?
Online courses can be designed to present diverse perspectives and challenge students' preconceived notions.
So, it's about how courses are structured?
Yes, course design plays a significant role.
Can students take proactive steps to overcome confirmation bias?
Yes, by seeking out diverse sources of information and actively challenging their own beliefs.
So, it's a personal responsibility too?
Absolutely, individuals can take control of their own learning.
Have you ever thought about how confirmation bias interacts with other cognitive biases?
Yes, it's interesting how biases can reinforce each other, right?
Exactly. Let's explore this.
Can you give an example of how confirmation bias and another bias might work together?
Sure. Imagine someone has a belief that a certain investment is a sure bet, anchoring bias. They'll seek information confirming their belief, confirmation bias.
So, they're anchored to their initial belief and only look for confirming evidence?
Yes, it's a dangerous combination. They ignore contradictory information.
Are there any strategies to mitigate these combined biases?
First, be aware of your biases. Recognize when you're anchored or seeking confirmation.
And then?
Actively seek out diverse information. Challenge your initial beliefs.
So, it's about breaking the cycle?
Exactly. It helps make more balanced decisions.
Can these biases affect everyday decisions too?
Certainly. For example, when buying a car, you might anchor to the first price you see and then only look for information that confirms it's a good deal.
And ignore other important factors?
Right. It's a common pitfall.
What if someone struggles to recognize their biases?
It can be challenging. In such cases, seeking input from others can help.
So, consulting with others can provide a fresh perspective.
Yes, it's an effective way to counteract biases.
Are there any other cognitive biases that often combine with confirmation bias?
Yes, the availability heuristic is another one. It's when people rely on readily available information. So, if they've seen a lot of positive news about a particular topic, they might confirm their beliefs based on that.
So, media exposure can reinforce biases?
Exactly. It's essential to seek a variety of sources to counteract it.
What about the bandwagon effect? How does it relate to confirmation bias?
The bandwagon effect is when people follow the crowd. Confirmation bias can make them selectively notice information that supports the popular opinion while ignoring dissenting views.
So, it's like a double layer of bias?
Yes, one bias feeds into the other.
Can you share some real-world examples where these biases combine to cause problems?
Think of a stock market bubble. Investors may anchor to rising prices, seek out confirming news, and follow the crowd. When the bubble bursts, they suffer losses.
So, it can have financial consequences?
Yes, and it's not limited to finance. It affects various decisions.
How can individuals become more aware of these biases in their daily lives?
Self-reflection and education are key. Recognize when you're anchoring, following the crowd, or seeking confirmation.
And actively work to counteract them?
Yes, by diversifying your sources of information and seeking alternative viewpoints.
It sounds like a continuous effort.
It is, but it leads to better decision-making and more open-minded thinking.